I signed the papers because I thought it would keep my family out of trouble. It was a Tuesday morning, 8:12 a.m., and the coffee in my hand was still too hot to drink. Everything felt normal: emails, traffic reports, my phone buzzing on the counter. Then I noticed the garage door was already open. I don't remember opening it. I didn't ask anyone about it either. By the end of that week, every single thing I believed about my life was already collapsing. I've learned that the most dangerous moments in a person's life don't announce themselves. They look like routines. They sound like engines warming up, coffee dripping into a mug, the low hum of a building waking up before sunrise. That's what my life looked like back then: predictable, structured, earned one ordinary day at a time. I was 48 years old and living in Mesa, Arizona, in a beige stucco house 10 minutes from the industrial corridor. Not big, not small. Paid off 3 years earlier. Every crack in the driveway was familiar to me. I worked as a fleet compliance supervisor for a regional trucking company. Nothing glamorous, but solid. My job was to make sure our vehicles met safety regulations, that logs were clean, inspections passed, and nothing came back to bite us during audits. It was quiet work, detail work. The kind of job where mistakes don't scream, they wait. My mornings always started at 5:40 a.m., alarm, shower. Blue work shirt, same brand, same cut. Coffee in a chipped white mug I'd owned since my divorce. At 6:15, I'd step into the garage, press the wall button, and wait for the door to rise all the way before backing out. I never rushed that part. It was a habit I'd picked up after a neighbor's kid rode his bike under a closing door years ago. You see enough incident reports, you learn patience. That morning felt no different. The sky was already pale orange, desert dry, promising another 100-degree day. I stood for a second in the driveway, sipping coffee, scrolling through overnight emails. 2 inspection reminders, 1 rescheduled delivery, nothing urgent. Inside the house, my sister's dog scratched at the back door. Her name was Ellie, the dog, not my sister. Ellie was a border collie mix, too smart for her own good, constantly watching, constantly alert. She'd been living with me for almost 6 months, ever since my sister, Rachel, moved in temporarily. That word, temporarily. Rachel was 43, 3 years younger than me. She'd shown up on my doorstep last winter with 2 suitcases, red eyes, and a story that came in pieces. Her husband had gotten into financial trouble, the kind that made people talk to lawyers and stop answering their phones. There had been yelling, then silence, then a letter taped to the door of the house she'd been renting. She didn't ask for help directly. She never did. She just stood there, hands jammed into her coat pockets, and said, "I don't know where else to go." So I told her to come in. I didn't think about the cost then. I thought about family, about how she'd watched my daughter when I worked night shifts years ago, about Thanksgiving dinners at our parents' place before Dad passed, about not being the kind of man who turns his back when someone is already on the ground. Rachel took the guest room. She was quiet, clean, too careful, actually. Always wiped the counters after using them, always asked before borrowing anything. She paid for her own groceries when she could, cooked dinner twice a week, and thanked me every single time I fixed something around the house. If you had asked me then, I would have said she was trying her best. By 6:30 m. I was on the road, heading toward the depot. The radio played low. Talk radio. Traffic was light. Same red pickup merged in front of me near the frontage road I saw at most mornings. Same dented bumper. Same faded license plate frame. At work, the day unfolded like clockwork. Inspections, phone calls, paperwork. I walked the lot with a clipboard, checked tire tread, ran my hand along brake lines, chatted briefly with drivers I'd known for years, men who trusted me to keep their rigs legal so they could keep feeding their families. Around 10:20 a.m., my phone buzzed. Rachel. I let it ring once before answering. She knew my schedule. She rarely called during work hours. "Hey," I said, stepping into the shade beside a parked trailer. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," she said quickly. Too quickly. "Sorry to bother you. Just small thing. Did you move the folder from the kitchen counter? What folder? The blue one, with the receipts. Is knowing Gezraud. I pictured the counter in my mind. Coffee maker, mail stack, keys. I don't think so. Oh, okay. I must have put it somewhere else. There was a pause. I could hear Ellie barking faintly in the background. You sure you're okay? I asked. I'm fine, she said. Really? Sorry. I'll see you tonight. She hung up before I could respond. I stared at my phone for a second longer than necessary, then slipped it back into my pocket. It didn't feel wrong exactly, just off, like a note played slightly out of key. By noon, I'd forgotten about it. That was the thing about my life back then. It had momentum. It carried me forward whether I examined every detail or not, and I trusted it, trusted myself, trusted the systems I'd built around me. After work, I stopped by the grocery store like always, picked up chicken breasts, bell peppers, tortillas, texted Rachel to see if she needed anything. She replied with a thumbs-up emoji and a "got it covered." I said. When I pulled into the driveway at 6:18 p.m., the garage door was open, just open, halfway up, hanging there. I slowed the truck, heart giving a small, involuntary thump. Not panic, just awareness. Rachel's car was parked inside. The lights were off. I parked, stepped out, and pressed the wall button. The door lowered smoothly, no hesitation, no strange noises. Inside, the house smelled like cumin and roasted onions. Rachel was at the stove, stirring something in a pan. Hey, she said, smiling. Dinner's almost ready. Garage door was open, I said casually, setting my keys down. Oh, she replied, without turning around. Must have been me. I went out earlier. I nodded, washed my hands, didn't ask where she'd gone, didn't ask when. People don't usually lie about doors. We ate together at the small kitchen table, talked about nothing important. The dog lay at Rachel's feet, unusually still. After dinner, I took the trash out. Desert air, cooling slightly, crickets starting up. As I walked back toward the house, I noticed something small, almost nothing. The side gate metal, painted white, was unlatched. I stood there for a moment, one hand on the gate, feeling the cool metal under my palm. I always latched it. Always. It was another habit, drilled into me after years of safety briefings and incident reviews. I closed it, heard the latch click. Inside, Rachel was already in her room. Door closed, light off. I sat on the couch, turned on the TV, and tried to relax. The day had been long. My shoulders ached. My mind replayed inspection numbers, schedules, routes. I didn't think about the folder, or the garage door, or the gate. Not yet. But somewhere between the sound of the TV and the quiet breathing of the house, a thought slipped in, uninvited and unwelcome. Everything feels normal, it said, and I didn't realize then how close I already was to losing it all. If I had to pinpoint the moment my sense of stability started to crack, it wouldn't be the big things people expect. It wasn't an argument. It wasn't a discovery. It was the absence of friction, how easily everything slid past me without resistance. The next morning followed the same script. Alarm at 5:40, shower, blue shirt, coffee. Ellie watching me from the hallway like she was taking notes. Rachel was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open, hair pulled back, mug untouched. Morning, I said. Morning, she replied, eyes on the screen. I noticed the blue folder then. It sat neatly stacked beside her laptop, exactly where she'd said she couldn't find it the day before. Find your folder? I asked, keeping my tone light. She glanced at it, then nodded. Yeah, it was in my bag. I forgot I put it there. Good, I said. And I meant it. The relief I felt was immediate, disproportional, like I'd avoided something without knowing what it was. I grabbed my mug and headed for the garage. The door lifted smoothly. I waited for it to reach the top before backing out, like always. At work, the day dragged. Not because of volume, but because of interruptions. A DOT inspector showed up unannounced. A driver called in sick. A spreadsheet didn't reconcile the way it should have. Small things, all manageable, but stacked just close enough together to leave a residue of irritation. Around 2 p.m., I got an email notification from our internal system, automated, impersonal. Account access log updated. That caught my attention. I oversaw compliance accounts for the company, but I also had a personal login for a shared vendor portal we use to track outsourced maintenance. The system sent alerts whenever access settings changed. I opened the email. It listed a timestamp from the night before, 9:47 p.m. I was on the couch at that time, watching TV, half asleep. The IP address didn't match the office. That wasn't unusual. We logged in remotely all the time, but the device identifier wasn't mine. I stared at the screen, reread the line, then opened the portal. My credentials still worked. Nothing appeared missing. No changes to records. No new downloads. I told myself it was a glitch, or a cached device from months ago, or one of the admin scripts running overnight. I closed the browser and went back to work. By the time I got home that evening, the heat had settled into the walls of the house. Rachel's car was gone. A sticky note sat on the counter. Ran out. Back soon. R. I reheated leftovers and ate alone, the quiet pressing in on me more than usual. Ellie lay under the table, ears twitching at every sound outside. Rachel came back around 8:30. She looked tired. More tired than errands should make someone. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just a long day," she said, trying to get my paperwork sorted. I nodded, but something in the phrasing stuck with me. Paperwork. She'd been saying that word a lot lately. Not job applications, not legal stuff, just paperwork. After she went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. I didn't open the compliance portal again. I told myself I wasn't suspicious, just thorough. I checked my personal email, then my bank app. Everything looked normal. Balances where they should be. No pending transactions. Before closing the laptop, I hesitated. Then I typed my own name into the county records search. It was something I'd done before, out of boredom or curiosity. Homeownership, property tax status. Public records were a comfort to me. They were fixed points. The page loaded slowly. Name, Michael Harper. Address, my address. Property status, active. Nothing unusual. I exhaled and shut the laptop. The next few days passed without incident, or at least, without anything that demanded explanation. Rachel continued her routine. Cooking, cleaning, making phone calls in her room with the door closed. Ellie followed her everywhere, tail low, eyes sharp. On Thursday morning, I noticed the mailbox was already open when I stepped outside to grab the paper. The mail sat inside, untouched. I picked it up, flipped through the envelopes. Utility bill, grocery coupons. A plain white envelope with no return address. It was addressed to me. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No letterhead, just typed text. You might want to review who has access to your accounts. No signature, no explanation. I stood there in the driveway, paper in my hand, the desert sun already warming the back of my neck. My first thought was scam. Someone phishing. Someone trying to scare me into calling a number that wasn't there. But there was no number. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket. Didn't mention it to Rachel. Didn't mention it to anyone. That night, I logged into the compliance portal again. This time, I pulled the full access log. Not just the alert summary, the raw data. There it was, clear as day. 2 logins I couldn't account for, both after 9 p.m., both from the same device identifier, both accessing vendor compliance reports tied to my company but not my personal profile. I felt a flicker of anger then, not fear. Anger. Someone was sloppy. Someone was using credentials without permission. I changed my password, logged out all sessions, enabled 2-factor authentication. Problem solved. Or so I thought. The following Monday, my supervisor called me into his office. He closed the door behind me, sat down, and folded his hands on the desk. "Mike," he said, "this isn't formal. Just a conversation." Those were never good words. "Okay," I said. "We received a request from an outside auditor," he continued. "They're asking for clarification on a few vendor compliance reports." "That's normal," I said. We get those all the time. Yes, he agreed. But these reports were accessed and exported under your credentials. I didn't speak right away. When? I asked. He slid a printed sheet across the desk. The timestamps matched the access logs I'd seen. Did you send these to anyone? He asked. No, I said too quickly. He raised an eyebrow. Not suspicious. Curious. I corrected myself. I accessed them, but I didn't export or forward anything. He nodded slowly. I believe you. That's why we're talking. I left his office with a knot in my stomach that hadn't been there before. This wasn't a glitch. It wasn't a system hiccup. It was my name, my credentials, my responsibility. That evening, I came home earlier than usual. Rachel was in the living room, sorting papers into piles on the coffee table, blue folder open, receipts spread out. What are those? I asked. She jumped slightly, then smiled. Just stuff. Trying to get organized. I looked at the papers. I didn't recognize most of them. Some had letterheads from places I'd never dealt with. Others were copies, not originals. Ellie sat between us, eyes moving back and forth. I didn't accuse, didn't ask to see them. I told myself not to overreact. But that night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling fan turning slow circles above me, I understood something important. Whatever was happening wasn't loud. It wasn't urgent. It was quiet, methodical. And it was already close enough to touch my life without asking permission. I fell asleep with that thought, not knowing yet how much it was going to cost me to ignore it any longer. The call came the next morning while I was standing in line at a drive-through coffee place near the depot. Same order as always, black coffee, no lid. The barista recognized me by face, not name. That was how consistent my life had been. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. I ignored it. It buzzed again. Unknown number. I pulled forward, paid, took the cup, and parked off to the side before answering. This is Mike, I said. Mr. Harper? The voice was calm, professional, male, late 40s, maybe older. This is Daniel Cortez. I work with Southwest Credit Solutions. I frowned slightly. Okay, I don't want to take much of your time, he said. I just have a quick verification question. I don't have any accounts with your company, I replied, already irritated. That's actually why I'm calling, he said. No defensiveness, no pressure. We received a document listing you as a secondary guarantor on a small business account. I'm trying to confirm whether that's accurate. Secondary guarantor. The phrase landed wrong, like a shoe on the wrong foot. What business? I asked. He paused, just long enough to sound like he was checking something. Desert Bloom Logistics, LLC. I stared through the windshield at the line of trucks rolling past the depot gate. I don't own a business, I said. Understood, he replied smoothly. That's what I needed to clarify. Hofer, and you're saying my name is on something? I pressed. Yes, he said, along with your home address. Same one on record with the county. My grip tightened around the steering wheel. Who submitted this document? I asked. I can't disclose that, he said. But thank you for confirming. We'll note that you're disputing involvement. Wait, I said, sharper than I intended. What kind of account is this? There was a hesitation this time. A human one. Equipment financing, he said. Nothing extreme, but still. Obligations. I didn't sign anything, I said. I understand, he replied. That's all I needed. The line went dead. I sat there longer than necessary, coffee cooling in my hand. Southwest Credit Solutions wasn't a scam operation. I knew that much. They handled mid-tier business collections, the kind that came after things went sideways quietly. Secondary guarantor meant one thing: backup responsibility. Someone had listed me as the fallback. At work, I couldn't focus. I walked the lot with my clipboard and realized I was checking the same tire twice. My supervisor asked if I was okay. I said I hadn't slept well. Around lunch, I pulled up the Arizona Corporation Commission website on my phone. Public records, fixed points. That comfort again. I typed in the business name. Desert Bloom Logistics, LLC. Status, active. Registered agent, Rachel Harper. Date of formation, 5 months ago. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. 5 months. That meant she'd formed the company less than a month after moving in with me. I tapped into the filing details. Articles of organization, mailing address, my address. I scrolled further. Secondary contact, Michael Harper. I felt heat rise up my neck. Not anger yet. Something closer to disbelief. This couldn't be what it looked like. Rachel wouldn't do that. She wouldn't drag me into something without telling me. There had to be an explanation. That word again. Explanation. I put my phone away and finished the day on autopilot. Signed forms, answered questions, smiled when required. When I got home, Rachel was already there, sitting at the kitchen table, blue folder in front of her, laptop open. She looked up when I walked in. "You're early," she said. "Slow day," I replied. I set my keys down and watched her hands. They were steady, nails trimmed, no signs of nerves. "Rachel," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "What's Desert Bloom Logistics?" She blinked, once, then smiled. "Oh," she said. "That. It's nothing big." "Nothing big? It's just something I started," she continued. "I didn't want to worry you. It's temporary." "Temporary how?" I asked. She shrugged. "Just until I get back on my feet." I nodded slowly. "Why is my name on it?" Her smile didn't disappear, but it thinned. "What do you mean?" I said, "why am I listed as a secondary guarantor?" She leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms loosely, not defensive, almost casual. "Because the bank required it," she said. "And it's not like it means anything unless something goes wrong." There it was. The logic. I stared at her, searching her face for something, guilt, maybe, or embarrassment. But all I saw was certainty, as if she'd already run this conversation in her head and decided how it would end. "You didn't ask me," I said. She sighed. "I didn't think it would matter. You're not actually responsible for anything. It's just a formality." I felt something shift in my chest, a small click, like a latch disengaging. "What equipment?" I asked. She waved a hand. "Some lease trailers, short term. It's all covered." "Covered how?" I pressed. "Contracts," she said. "Clients. You don't need to worry." That sentence landed harder than anything else she'd said. You don't need to worry. That night, after she went to bed, I sat alone in the living room with my laptop open. I didn't look at her documents. I didn't open the blue folder. I searched the business. Desert Bloom Logistics didn't have a website. No reviews. No public-facing presence. Just filings. Equipment leases. Short-term financing. I pulled my credit report. There it was. A soft inquiry. Recent. My name? My address? I didn't sleep much. The next day, someone else asked a question they didn't belong to. I was inspecting a trailer when a man in a polo shirt approached me. Clipboard. Badge clipped to his belt. "Michael Harper?" he asked. "Yes. State Department of Transportation," he said. "Just a quick clarification." My stomach tightened. "Regarding a vehicle registered under Desert Bloom Logistics," he continued. "We're missing some compliance documentation. We were told you might have it." "I don't," I said. He nodded. "That's what I thought. I just wanted to confirm." "Why would you think I had it?" I asked. He looked at me for a second, then shrugged. "Your name came up." After he left, I stood there in the heat, sweat trickling down my spine, and understood something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern. Someone had been using my stability as leverage, my clean record, my habits, my silence. That evening, Rachel cooked dinner like nothing was wrong. She talked about grocery prices, about Ellie's vet appointment, about a friend she might call. I listened, nodded, played my role, but inside, something had changed. The questions weren't coming from me anymore. They were coming from outside, and they were starting to sound like warnings. I told myself I wasn't panicking. Panic is loud. It makes you pace, raise your voice, jump to conclusions. What I felt was quieter than that, more deliberate, like the slow tightening of a bolt you didn't know was already threaded. The day after the DOT inspector showed up, I didn't confront Rachel. I didn't ask more questions. I didn't demand explanations. Instead, I did what I had spent most of my adult life doing when something didn't line up. I verified. That morning, I woke up before my alarm. The house was still dark, the kind of dark that makes you aware of every sound. The refrigerator, cycling. Ellie, shifting in her sleep. Rachel's door closed. No light underneath. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, careful not to wake anyone. I told myself I was just double-checking things so I could put the issue to rest. That was the story I needed to believe. I started with the business filings. Desert Bloom Logistics, LLC. I pulled every public document I could find. Articles of organization, amendments, registered agent changes. Everything was clean. Too clean. No mistakes, no sloppy entries. Whoever had filed this knew what they were doing. I clicked through the equipment lease records next. 2 trailers. 1 short-term rental agreement. The amounts weren't massive, but they weren't trivial either. Enough to hurt if something went wrong. Enough to matter. Then I checked the financing. A small business line of credit. Not active yet. Approved, but not drawn on. Secondary guarantor. Me. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. The fan wasn't on yet. The air felt heavy, stale. I could hear Rachel moving in her room now, the faint sound of a drawer opening, then closing. I shut the laptop. At work, I kept my head down. I didn't bring up the inspector. I didn't ask IT to run a full audit on my credentials. That would have raised questions I wasn't ready to answer. Instead, I waited. By Thursday afternoon, another email came through the compliance system. This time, it wasn't automated. It was from our internal legal department. Subject line, request for clarification, vendor access. I opened it slowly. They were polite, neutral. They asked if I had shared reports with any third-party logistics startups in the past 6 months. They listed Desert Bloom Logistics by name. I replied with one sentence. No, I have not authorized access or shared documents with that entity. I read it 3 times before hitting send. When I got home that evening, Rachel was in the garage. The door was open. She was standing near my workbench, sorting through a stack of envelopes. I stopped just inside the doorway and watched her for a moment. She looked comfortable there, too comfortable, like someone who had been using the space longer than they admitted. Hey, she said, not turning around. Mail came early today. I nodded. Anything important? Just bills, she replied. I set them on the counter. She didn't look at me. That was new. That night, after dinner, I went out to the garage under the pretense of taking out the trash. The air had cooled enough to make it bearable. The desert sky was clear, stars sharp and distant. I opened the small metal cabinet where I kept old paperwork, manuals, receipts, things I didn't need often but didn't want to lose. It was unlocked. I knew I'd locked it the week before. I opened it slowly. Everything was there, nothing missing. But the folders had been shifted. Not much, just enough that I noticed. I stood there longer than necessary, trash bag in my hand, listening to the quiet. Inside the house, Rachel laughed at something on TV. I didn't say anything. Over the next few days, I paid closer attention. Not in an obvious way. I didn't follow her. I didn't check her phone. I didn't suddenly start asking questions that would tip my hand. I noticed the little things. How she waited until I left for work before making calls. How she always closed her laptop when I walked into the room. How she'd started asking questions about my job that she'd never cared about before. Do you guys get audited often? She asked one night, stirring a pot on the stove. Sometimes, I said. Why? Just curious, she replied. Curious. That weekend, I decided to do something I hadn't planned on doing yet. I pulled my credit report again. This time, there was a hard inquiry. Recent. Legitimate. A commercial lender. My chest tightened, but my hands stayed steady. I clicked through the details. No new accounts opened yet. Just interest. Just eyes on my name. I printed the report and folded it carefully, sliding it into a folder of my own. Not the blue one. A red one I kept for work. Old habit. Sunday morning, Rachel suggested we go to brunch. I figured it might be nice to get out, she said. You've been tense. I looked at her across the kitchen table. She was right. I had been. Sure, I said. The place she picked was crowded, loud, the kind of environment where conversations get lost in background noise. We sat across from each other, menus between us. She talked about a potential client, about a friend who might help her expand, about how things were finally starting to look up. I listened and nodded, asked the right questions, played my part. At one point, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I really appreciate you," she said. "I couldn't do this without you." I smiled back. What she didn't know was that I had already stopped thinking of this as helping. That afternoon, while she took Ellie to the park, I logged into my bank account and set up alerts. Every transaction, every inquiry, every change. Then I called my insurance agent. "Just a quick question," I said. "Does my policy cover business liabilities if someone uses my name without authorization?" There was a pause on the other end. "That depends," he said. "Why do you ask?" "No reason," I replied. "Just planning ahead." That night, lying in bed, I replayed everything from the past 6 months. Rachel arriving with suitcases, the timing of the LLC formation, the gradual shift in her behavior. It didn't feel like betrayal. Not yet. It felt like positioning, like someone moving pieces around a board while assuming the other player wasn't watching. I turned onto my side and stared at the wall, listening to Rachel's breathing even out as she fell asleep. I understood something then, with a clarity that surprised me. If I was wrong, the cost would be embarrassment, awkward conversations, hurt feelings. If I was right, the cost would be my job, my credit, my freedom. That was when I stopped checking to reassure myself and started checking to prepare. The night I stopped sleeping was the night I found something I wasn't supposed to see, in a place I wasn't even looking. It started with a noise, not loud, not alarming, just the soft, hollow click of a door closing somewhere inside the house at 11:43 p.m. I remember the time because I checked my phone immediately after, the way you do when something interrupts a half-formed thought. Rachel had gone to bed an hour earlier. I was still on the couch, lights low, TV muted, scrolling through nothing in particular. Old habit. I liked the quiet after the day settled. Ellie's head snapped up at the sound. She didn't bark. She didn't move. She just stared down the hallway, ears forward, body tense. "That's nothing," I said aloud, more for myself than the dog. I got up and walked toward the hallway. Rachel's door was open. Her room was dark. "Rachel?" I called softly. No answer. The bathroom light was off. The spare room untouched. Everything looked normal. I went back to the couch, but the sense of ease I'd been trying to preserve didn't come back. Something had shifted. The air felt different, heavier. I didn't confront her. I didn't check the garage. I didn't open cabinets or snoop through drawers like a man looking for a fight. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I logged into my email and searched for my own name. Thousands of results came back. Spam, newsletters, old confirmations. I refined the search. Attachments, PDFs. That's when I saw it. An email from 3 weeks earlier. I hadn't opened it at the time. It had landed in a subfolder I rarely checked, system notifications routed there by an old rule I'd set up years ago. Subject line: Document Delivery Confirmation. Sender: a commercial scanning service I didn't recognize. I opened it. Attached was a single PDF. I clicked. The document loaded slowly, line by line, like it was reluctant to reveal itself. It was a personal guarantee form. My name was typed at the top, my address, my phone number, my employer. Below that, a signature. My signature, or something close enough that my stomach dropped anyway. The handwriting was careful, slightly slanted, a decent imitation. Whoever had signed it had taken their time. The date matched one of the nights Rachel had gone out late to meet a friend. Here 7. I stared at the screen, my heart beating in my ears. This wasn't circumstantial. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was forgery. I scrolled down. There was a witness signature at the bottom. Initials only. Or DUP2. I closed the laptop. Not slammed, not rushed, just closed. I sat there in the dark, hands resting on my knees, feeling the weight of what I'd just seen settle into my chest. This wasn't about being careless anymore. It wasn't about misplaced trust. This was someone actively putting me in harm's way. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed listening to the house breathe, every creak amplified, every distant car sounding closer than it should. Around 3 a.m., I heard Rachel get up, soft footsteps, the bathroom door, running water. I kept my eyes closed, kept my breathing steady. I felt her slide back into bed beside me, careful not to wake me. I wondered how long she'd been practicing that. The next morning, I went to work like nothing had changed. I showered, dressed, drank coffee, said good morning, kissed her on the cheek as I left. She smiled, warm, familiar. "You okay?" she asked. "You look tired." "Didn't sleep great," I said. "Me neither," she replied, without missing a beat. At work, I printed the PDF and locked it in my desk drawer. Then, I went through the access logs again. This time, I didn't just look at timestamps. I compared IP addresses. One of them matched my home network. Another matched a coffee shop 3 blocks from the house, the one Rachel liked to walk to in the afternoons. I didn't confront her. Instead, I called the scanning service. "I received a document through your system," I said calmly. "I need to verify how it was submitted." They put me on hold. When the representative came back, her voice was polite, efficient. "It was scanned and uploaded in person at our Mesa location," she said. "Submitted by a woman, middle-aged, brown hair." She presented valid ID. "Whose ID?" I asked. "Rachel Harper," she replied. I thanked her and hung up. That afternoon, my supervisor called me into his office again. This time, there was someone else there. A woman from HR, legal on speakerphone. They didn't accuse. They didn't threaten. They asked questions, measured ones. Had I authorized the use of my credentials? Had I signed any personal guarantees? Was I involved with Desert Bloom Logistics in any capacity? I answered honestly. No, no, no. They exchanged glances. "We're opening an internal review," legal said. "This isn't disciplinary, but we need to protect the company." I nodded. I understood. I'd done this work long enough to know how it went. When I got home that evening, Rachel was in the living room, sorting through papers again. Blue folder. Same routine. I watched her for a second before speaking. "Did you sign something for Desert Bloom using my name?" I asked. She froze, just for a second. Then she looked up, eyes wide, expression wounded. "What?" she said. "No, of course not. I found a document," I said evenly. Her face changed then. Not guilt, calculation. "It was just paperwork," she said. "I didn't think it would matter. It was easier that way." "Easier for who?" I asked. "For both of us," she said quickly. "I was going to fix it. I just needed time." Time. That word again. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't threaten. I nodded once and said, "We'll talk about it later." She looked relieved. Too relieved. That night, after she went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the printed guarantee form. My name, my forged signature, the witness initials. This wasn't just financial risk. This was criminal exposure. If the business failed, and I could already see signs that it would, I wouldn't just lose money. I could lose my job, my license, everything I'd built my life on. And the worst part wasn't the danger. It was the realization that she'd decided, somewhere along the way, that I was the safest thing to sacrifice. I folded the document and slid it back into the red folder. Then I opened my laptop and started documenting everything. Dates, times, conversations, access logs, calls. I didn't know yet how I was going to use it, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was no longer about finding reassurance. This was about survival. And from that moment on, I stopped assuming the truth would protect me on its own. It took me longer than I care to admit to understand what was actually at stake. Not because the signs weren't there, but because I kept translating them into the wrong language. I kept thinking in terms of money, leases, credit, paperwork. Things that could be fixed if you caught them early enough. That was the mistake. The morning after, I confronted Rachel, if you could even call it that. I sat in my truck outside the house for a full 5 minutes before driving to work. The engine idled, air conditioner rattling awake, and I stared at the front door like it might open on its own and explain everything. It didn't. At work, I went through the motions. I checked inspection sheets, signed off on maintenance logs, talked a driver through a minor violation that would have rattled him if he'd gotten pulled over with it unresolved. Normal responsibilities, normal authority. That was when it hit me. Authority. Everything I had spent the last 20 years building wasn't stored in a bank account. It wasn't tied to the equity in my house or the balance on my credit card. It lived in how people trusted me, how regulators saw my name and assumed things were in order, how my employer put my signature on compliance reports without a second thought. My name meant something, and someone else was using it. That afternoon, I got a call from the insurance agent I'd spoken to earlier in the week. He didn't sound casual this time. "Mike," he said, "I looked into that hypothetical question you asked." "Okay," I replied. "If your name is attached to a business liability even indirectly, and there's evidence you knew or should have known about it, your personal coverage could be affected." "Define affected," I said. He exhaled. "Denied, voided, depending on the circumstances." I thanked him and hung up. Denied, voided, words that don't just apply to policies. They apply to reputations, to credibility, to the unspoken assumptions people make about you when they hand you responsibility. On my lunch break, I sat in my truck and pulled up the state licensing portal, the one that listed my professional credentials, years of renewals, clean records, no complaints. I imagined that page with a flag next to my name. Under review. That night, I didn't eat dinner. I told Rachel I wasn't hungry. She didn't push. She rarely did when she thought she'd won ground. Instead, I went into the garage and sat on a folding chair, staring at the concrete floor. The cabinet where my paperwork lived was closed, locked. I checked it twice. I thought about the drivers I worked with, men who trusted me to keep them compliant so they wouldn't lose their livelihoods over a technicality. I thought about the inspectors who nodded when they saw my badge, the supervisors who put my name on sensitive documents without a second glance. All of that was fragile, not because I'd done something wrong, but because someone else had decided to act as if I had. Rachel came into the garage quietly and leaned against the doorframe. "You're being dramatic," she said gently. "This isn't as serious as you're making it." I didn't look at her. "You forged my signature," I said. She sighed, like a parent dealing with an unreasonable child. "I copied it. There's a difference." "There's not," I replied. She walked in a few steps. "I was trying to protect us." "Is of 1-5. Us?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "If this works, it helps both of us. I'm not some stranger, Mike. I'm your sister." That was the first time she'd used that word like a shield. "You didn't protect me," I said quietly. "You used me." Her jaw tightened. "You're overreacting." "No," I said. "I'm finally reacting to the right thing." She shook her head and walked back into the house. That night, I added a new section to the document I'd been keeping. Potential consequences. Non-financial. Loss of employment. Loss of professional license. Criminal exposure. Civil liability. Reputational damage. I stared at the list for a long time. The next morning, my supervisor pulled me aside again. "We've suspended your access temporarily," he said. "This is procedural, until the review is complete." "How long?" I asked. He hesitated. "Hard to say." I handed over my badge without argument. Driving home in the middle of the day felt surreal, like being ejected from your own life without ceremony. Rachel was on the phone when I walked in. She lowered her voice as soon as she saw me. "I'll call you back," she said, then hung up. "That was fast," she added. "Did you take the day off?" "No," I said. "I was suspended." Her face flickered. Not fear. Annoyance. "For how long?" "Don't know." She crossed her arms. "See? This is what I was trying to avoid. If you just trusted me." "If I'd trusted you," I cut in, "I'd be finished." "Is aside." She opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. Something changed then, not in her, in me. I stopped trying to convince her. I went into my bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. My phone buzzed with a notification from my bank, another inquiry. Another pair of eyes on my name. That was when I understood the real theft. She wasn't taking money. She was taking my future options. Every decision I might need to make later, leaving a job, refinancing, moving, was being narrowed without my consent. Every authority figure who looked at my name now saw a question mark forming. That's what she'd stolen. Not cash, not assets, credibility. That evening, I called a lawyer. Not to file charges, not yet, just to ask questions. Hypothetically, I said, if someone forges your signature and lists you as a guarantor without permission, what's the exposure? He didn't hesitate. Significant, he said, especially if you don't act. Act how? Document, dispute, create a record that you did not consent. I thanked him and hung up. Later that night, Rachel knocked on my bedroom door. I didn't mean for this to get out of hand, she said. I'll fix it. I believed that she believed that, but I also understood something else. The system didn't care about intentions. It cared about records, and right now, the record said I was involved. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, I realized the situation had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. This wasn't about whether Rachel would stop. It was about whether I would. Because if I didn't draw that line myself, someone else would do it for me, and they wouldn't ask whose side of the story they were hearing. That was the night I stopped thinking like a brother and started thinking like a witness. The decision to stop pushing back didn't come with relief. It came with a kind of quiet resolve, the sort that settles in after you accept that force will only make things worse. If I challenged Rachel directly, she would retreat, adjust, find another angle. I had already seen how easily she navigated systems I trusted. I couldn't afford to make her more careful, so I did the opposite. I became easier. The next morning, I made breakfast. Eggs, toast, coffee, nothing fancy, nothing suspicious. I asked her how she'd slept. I listened when she talked. I didn't mention my suspension. I didn't mention the lawyer. I didn't mention the guarantee form sitting in my red folder like a live wire. She noticed the shift immediately. People who manipulate systems are very good at reading atmospheres. She relaxed into it, shoulders loosening, voice warmer. She took it as forgiveness, or fatigue, or both, whatever story worked best. Thank you, she said as she poured coffee into her mug, for not freaking out. I smiled. I just need things to calm down. That's what I've been saying, she replied. I nodded and let it pass. From that point on, I became a version of myself she could predict again. I left the house at the same time. I sat in the same chair in the evenings. I asked questions that sounded supportive instead of suspicious. How's the business stuff going? I asked one night. She brightened. Better. I think I've got a lead. That's good, I said. You deserve a win. She smiled at that, and I felt something harden in my chest. Not anger, focus. While she talked, I watched the details. The way she framed things, the names she dropped, the places she referenced. She was building something fragile and pretending it was solid. I let her. I also started doing things she didn't see. I set up a separate email account on a library computer, one I'd never logged into from home. I forwarded copies of access logs, emails, and scanned documents to it. I printed bank alerts and kept them in chronological order. I recorded dates and times of conversations, not what I felt, not what I assumed, just what was said. I learned quickly how much you can gather when someone believes they're unobserved. Rachel took calls in the garage now, door half closed. I didn't hover. I didn't listen through walls. I sat in the living room and let the sound carry naturally. I caught fragments, equipment, extension, deadline. One afternoon, she asked if she could borrow my truck. Just for an hour, she said. I need to pick something up. Sure, I replied. Keys are on the counter. She hesitated for half a second before taking them. That hesitation told me more than any argument ever could. When she came back, the truck smelled faintly of oil and cardboard. I didn't ask where she'd gone. I checked the mileage later. Quietly, I wrote it down. At night, when the house went still, I reviewed what I'd collected. I didn't jump to conclusions. I didn't connect dots prematurely. I waited for patterns. They came. Another hard inquiry appeared on my credit report. Another vendor emailed my work account asking for clarification on a document I hadn't sent. A letter arrived addressed to Desert Bloom Logistics, care of my home address, stamped final notice in red. Rachel intercepted the mail more often now. I let her. One evening, she brought up the guarantee again. Unprompted. I talked to someone, she said. They said it's basically meaningless. Just procedural stuff. That's good, I said. You're not mad? She asked, studying my face. No, I replied. I just want this behind us. She nodded, satisfied. The truth was, I didn't want it behind us. I wanted it fully in front of her. That weekend, she invited a friend over, a man I didn't recognize. Mid-30s, clean cut, confident in the way people are when they believe the rules favor them. This is Mark, she said. He's helping me with the business. Mark shook my hand firmly. Nice place, he said. Thanks, I replied. They talked at the kitchen table while I pretended to watch TV. I didn't strain to hear them. I didn't need to. They weren't careful. Mark asked questions about storage space, about parking, about inspections. Rachel answered easily. She's got access, she said at one point, gesturing toward me without looking. It's not an issue. I made a note of that phrasing later. After Mark left, Rachel seemed energized. See, she said, things are moving. I'm glad, I replied. That night, I logged into my email and found something new. A calendar invite I didn't create. It was subtle, buried among old notifications. A meeting scheduled at a lender's office downtown. My name listed as attendee. The time coincided with a day I'd be at work if I still had access. I didn't delete it. I added a reminder. The following week, my supervisor called. The review is ongoing, he said. We need one more thing from you. What's that? A written statement, clarifying your relationship to Desert Bloom Logistics. I told him I'd send it. I didn't send it immediately. Instead, I waited until that night and asked Rachel a simple question over dinner. Do you consider me part of your business? She smiled. Of course not. I nodded. Good. I wrote the statement that same evening. Clear, factual, no emotion, no accusations. I attached copies of the forged guarantee and access logs. I sent it to legal. I didn't tell Rachel. From that point on, things accelerated. The lender meeting moved up. Rachel became more secretive, but not enough. She assumed I was still asleep when she left early one morning. I wasn't. I listened to the garage door. I noted the time. Later that day, my phone rang. Unknown number. This is Mike, I said. Mr. Harper, the voice said. This is an investigator with the state. We'd like to ask you a few questions. Of course, I replied calmly. When? Soon, he said. Very soon. I hung up and sat there for a moment, feeling the weight of it settle. That evening, Rachel was anxious. She paced, checked her phone repeatedly. She asked if I'd heard from anyone at work. No, I said. She exhaled. I realized then that the game had shifted. She was no longer using me. She was reacting to me, and that meant one thing. The version of me she'd been relying on, the quiet, accommodating one, was still working. For now. I went to bed that night knowing something she didn't. The systems she thought she was navigating alone were already watching her, and I was done warning her where the edges were. I'd been telling myself a comforting lie without realizing it, that if I could just isolate Rachel's actions, treat them as a personal failure, a desperate overreach, then the situation would remain contained. One person, one bad choice, one line crossed. That illusion didn't survive the following week. It started with a knock on the door on a Tuesday afternoon. Not loud, not aggressive, the kind of knock that assumes you're expecting it. I was home, officially on administrative leave, though no one had used those exact words. The house was quiet. Rachel had left early that morning, claiming she had meetings. I opened the door to find two people standing on the porch. A man and a woman, both mid-40s, plain clothes, clipboards, the kind of professional neutrality that strips emotion out of a situation before you even speak. Michael Harper? The man asked. Yes, I'm Agent Wallace. This is Agent Kim. We're with the state. I stepped aside and let them in. They didn't sit. They stood in the living room, eyes moving over the space, the furniture, the walls, the family photos I'd never bothered to take down after my divorce. "We're conducting a routine inquiry," Agent Kim said. "We'd like to clarify a few things regarding Desert Bloom Logistics." I nodded. "I've been expecting this." That seemed to register. They asked about my job, my credentials, my relationship to Rachel. I answered plainly. Didn't embellish, didn't speculate. Then Agent Wallace asked a question that didn't fit the rest. "Do you know Mark Ellison?" The name landed like a stone. "Yes," I said. "He was here recently. A friend of my sister's." They exchanged a look. "And how would you describe his role?" Agent Kim asked. "I wouldn't," I said. "I don't know his role." They nodded, writing something down. "Mr. Ellison is listed as a consultant on multiple filings," Agent Wallace said, "including equipment procurement and vendor negotiation." "That's news to me," I replied. Agent Kim looked up. "Is it?" I met her gaze. "Yes." They didn't push. They didn't accuse. They thanked me for my time and left. After they were gone, I sat on the couch and stared at the blank TV screen. My reflection looked older than it had a week earlier. Not because of stress, because of clarity. This wasn't Rachel improvising. This was a structure. That evening, Rachel came home late. Later than usual. Her energy was different, controlled, tight. "Did anyone stop by today?" she asked casually, setting her bag down. "No," I said. She nodded, but the tension didn't leave her shoulders. Over dinner, she mentioned Mark again. "He's been a huge help," she said. "Knows how to move things along." "Does he?" I replied. "Yes," she said quickly. "He's done this before." "Before what?" She hesitated. "Just a fraction. Startups. Small operations." I let it go. That night, after she went to bed, I opened my laptop and pulled up public records again. This time, I searched Mark Ellison. The results were instructive. 2 dissolved LLCs in the past 4 years, both in logistics-adjacent fields, both with short lifespans, both with outstanding disputes listed in small print at the bottom of the filings. Different names, different addresses, same pattern. I followed the trail further. One of the dissolved companies had listed a guarantor who wasn't an owner, someone with stable employment, clean credit, someone who'd later filed a fraud dispute. I sat back in my chair, the pieces arranging themselves without effort now. Rachel wasn't the architect. She was the door. The next confirmation came from an unexpected place. My phone rang while I was in the grocery store. Unknown number. "This is Mike," I said. "Mr. Harper," a woman's voice said. "My name is Susan. I'm calling regarding a matter involving Desert Bloom Logistics." "I'm listening." "I used to work for a company that Mark Ellison consulted for," she said. "Your name came up during a review. I thought you should know." I leaned against the freezer aisle, heart steady, mind sharp. "What should I know?" I asked. She exhaled. "That this isn't new, and you're not the first person whose name has been used this way." She didn't give me details. She didn't have to. The implication was enough. When I hung up, I stood there longer than necessary, the cold air biting through my shirt. On the drive home, something settled into place. I wasn't dealing with a betrayal born of panic or desperation. I was dealing with a system that relied on trust like fuel. People who knew how to spot stability and drain it without leaving visible marks until it was too late. Rachel had stepped into that system willingly. Maybe she thought she was in control. Maybe she thought she was different. Or maybe she'd simply decided that the cost would land on someone else. That night, I confronted her again, not with anger, but with precision. "Who is Mark really?" I asked. She looked at me for a long moment, then sighed. "You wouldn't understand," she said. "Try me." She rubbed her temples. "He knows people. He knows how to make things happen. This was supposed to be quick." "Quick for who?" "For me," she snapped. "I needed out. I needed momentum." "And I was what?" I asked. "Collateral?" She didn't answer. That was answer enough. I went back to my room and added another section to my document. Associated parties. Mark Ellison. Consultant. Pattern of dissolved entities. Unidentified lenders. Repeated inquiries. Third-party vendors. Compliance exposure. My employer. Reputational risk. I stared at the list and felt something unexpected. Relief. Because once you realize the problem is bigger than one person, you stop trying to fix it emotionally. You stop hoping for apologies or understanding. You start thinking in terms of containment. The next day, my supervisor called again. "We've escalated the review," he said. "State's involved now." "I know," I replied. There was a pause. "You seem prepared." "I am," I said. When I hung up, I realized something else. Rachel wasn't the only one who'd made a choice. Mark had. The lenders had. Even my employer had, by choosing procedure over protection. None of them were villains in their own minds. That was the most dangerous part. They were all doing what systems encourage people to do: shift risk outward. And right now, I was the edge of the board. That evening, Rachel packed a bag. "I'm staying with a friend for a few days," she said. "Just until things settle." I nodded. "That's probably for the best." She hesitated at the door. "You're not calling the police, are you?" I met her eyes. "I'm letting the truth do its job." "Third is where—" She didn't look reassured. After she left, the house felt different. Not empty. Exposed. I sat at the kitchen table and reviewed everything one more time. The documents, the logs, the names. This wasn't about stopping Rachel anymore. It was about deciding how much damage I was willing to let continue before I stepped fully into the light. And for the first time since this began, I understood the real shape of the dilemma. If I pushed too hard, I would burn everything down, including myself. If I stayed quiet too long, I would become complicit. Somewhere between those two extremes was a line I had to draw, and I was getting very close to it. Up until that point, everything had been moving in one direction: forward, outward, like a structure failing under its own weight. I'd accepted that damage was inevitable. The only question was how much of it I would let land on me. Then I found the one thing that complicated everything. It happened on a Wednesday morning, the kind of morning that looks harmless in hindsight. Overcast for once, cooler than usual. I was at home, sitting at the kitchen table, red folder open, coffee untouched. I was preparing to send one last packet of documents to the investigator Agent Kim had assigned to my case. It would have been clean, decisive, the kind of action people expect when they hear stories like this. I almost sent it. Instead, I hesitated because of a voicemail. I hadn't noticed it earlier. It was buried under automated calls and unknown numbers, left 2 nights before, time-stamped just after midnight. I don't usually listen to voicemails from numbers I don't recognize. That night, I did. "Mike, it's Rachel." Her voice was different, not defensive, not sharp, stripped down. "I know you're probably not going to answer. That's okay. I need you to hear this." There was a pause. I could hear traffic in the background. Wind. "I didn't plan for it to go this far," she said. "I swear, I thought I was buying time. Just enough to get out from under everything." Another pause. Longer this time. "I wasn't trying to ruin you." That was the line that stuck. Not "I didn't hurt you." Not "I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to." She kept talking. She talked about the divorce, about the debt she hadn't told me about collection calls that never stopped, about Mark showing up when she was already desperate, already cornered. "He said your name was clean," she said quietly, "that it would keep everyone calm. He said no one would get hurt." I closed my eyes and listened. She talked about fear, about the constant calculation of what would happen if the house she'd been renting got foreclosed, if her credit collapsed completely, if she ended up sleeping in her car. "I told myself I'd fix it before you ever felt it," she said. "I really believed that." I didn't know how long I sat there after the message ended. The house was silent. Ellie lay near my feet, head on her paws, watching me. That voicemail didn't excuse anything, but it changed the weight of the next step. Because now the situation wasn't just about me and a system that didn't care who it crushed. It was about what would happen if I finished what I'd started. If I sent that packet in full, with every attachment, every log, every forged document, there would be no ambiguity left, no room for interpretation. Rachel wouldn't just be implicated, she'd be exposed completely. Fraud, forgery, criminal charges. Mark would go down too, probably deserved it. He'd done this before. He'd do it again. But Rachel? She wouldn't get a warning. She wouldn't get a chance to recalibrate or quietly exit. She would get a record. A permanent one. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, watching the slow rotation of the fan. This was the part no one talks about when they say, do the right thing. The part where the right thing doesn't feel clean. The part where justice isn't abstract, it has a face, a voice, a history. I thought about our childhood, about her being the loud one, the reckless one, about me being the steady one who cleaned up messes without complaint, about how that dynamic had never really changed. Had I enabled this by always being the stable ground? The thought made my stomach turn. Later that afternoon, I met with the lawyer I'd spoken to earlier. Not to act, just to understand. Hypothetically, I said, if someone is used as a guarantor without consent, and there's evidence of forgery, what happens if they don't pursue charges? He didn't answer right away. Then the system assumes consent, he said, or at least tolerance. So I'm exposed either way, I said. Yes, he replied, but the degree varies. How? Is how? If you act fully, he said, you protect yourself legally. But the consequences for the other party will be severe. And if I don't, you carry ongoing risk and some responsibility. I nodded. That night, I couldn't sleep again. But this time, it wasn't fear keeping me awake. It was calculation. I laid everything out in my head like a ledger. Option 1, full exposure. My name cleared completely. My job possibly salvaged. Rachel prosecuted. Family relationship permanently destroyed. Option 2, partial action. Dispute records. Contain damage. Let the system close in slowly. Rachel left in limbo but not destroyed. Neither option felt like a victory. The next morning, I did something that surprised even me. I called Rachel. She answered on the third ring. I'm not asking you to explain, I said before she could speak. I just need to know one thing. There was silence on the line. If I step back, I continued, if I don't push this all the way, will you stop? Another pause. Yes, she said. I swear. I believed that she believed it. But belief wasn't enough anymore. After the call, I went back to the kitchen table and reopened the red folder. I separated the documents into 2 stacks. One contained everything. The other contained only what was necessary to protect me. I stared at them for a long time. The truth was, I had spent weeks preparing to expose everything because it felt like the only way to regain control. But control comes with its own costs. If I went all the way, I would be right, but I would also be alone in a way that couldn't be undone. And if I held back, even slightly, I would be choosing a quieter form of justice. One that wouldn't make headlines or deliver satisfaction, but might stop the damage without adding another casualty. That was the moment I realized the story had changed. This was no longer about catching someone. It was about deciding what kind of ending I could live with. Because whatever I chose next would define not just what happened to Rachel, but who I would be after all of this was over. And I wasn't ready to decide that yet. I didn't make my decision all at once. It came together in pieces, quietly, the way most irreversible choices do. Not with a dramatic declaration, not with anger, but with a kind of cold arithmetic that left no room for sentiment. I stopped thinking in terms of punishment. I started thinking in terms of leverage. The system Rachel and Mark were operating in wasn't built for morality. It was built for risk management, exposure, liability. And the truth was, I didn't need to destroy them to protect myself. I just needed to change the direction the pressure was flowing. The first thing I did was something Rachel would never have anticipated. I didn't send the full packet to the state investigator. I sent a version of it. It included the forged guarantee. It included the access logs tying activity to my home network. It included my sworn statement denying consent. What it did not include were the names of everyone involved. I framed it narrowly, cleanly, as a case of identity misuse by an unnamed third party. No accusations, no speculation, just facts. That single choice shifted the entire tone of the inquiry. Instead of a fraud investigation with multiple targets, it became a liability review focused on containment, on stopping damage, not assigning blame. That mattered. At the same time, I filed formal disputes with every lender and vendor that had touched my name, Not emotional letters, not explanations. Standardized affidavits, certified mail, paper trails that said one thing, over and over. I did not authorize this. Those disputes triggered automatic processes, holds, freezes, internal reviews, things that didn't look dramatic from the outside, but were devastating if you were relying on momentum. Rachel called me 2 days later. They froze the account, she said, panic breaking through her voice. Everything's stuck. I know, I replied. What did you do? She asked. I protected myself, I said. That's all. She started to argue, then stopped. You said you wouldn't go to the police, she said. I didn't, I replied. I went to the systems you used. That distinction mattered more than she understood. Mark, on the other hand, understood immediately. He showed up at the house the following afternoon, unannounced. I saw his car pull up through the front window and felt a familiar calm settle over me. The kind that comes when you know exactly where the lines are. I didn't invite him in. We stood on the porch. You didn't have to do this, he said quietly. Yes, I replied. I did. You're cutting off oxygen, he said. You know that. That was the idea. He studied me for a long moment. You're smarter than she is. That's not a compliment, I said. He nodded once. You think this ends it? I think it stops you, I replied. His mouth tightened. You're making enemies. I know, stay. No, I said. I'm removing myself from the board. That was the truth. Within a week, Desert Bloom Logistics was effectively dead. No dramatic collapse. No headlines. Just stalled payments. Withdrawn offers. Unanswered calls. The kind of quiet failure that leaves no one to blame but timing. Mark disappeared. I didn't ask where he went. I didn't need to know. Rachel came by once more to collect the rest of her things. She looked smaller somehow, worn down. This didn't have to be like this, she said, standing in the doorway. Yes, I replied. It did. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing left to say. 2 days later, I got a call from my supervisor. The review is concluding, he said. Legal is satisfied with your statement. And? I asked. And we're restoring your access, he replied. Effective Monday. I thanked him and hung up. The relief I felt wasn't joy. It was release, like setting down a weight you didn't realize you'd been carrying until your hands started to shake. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table. Red folder closed, documents filed away where I hoped I'd never need them again. The house was quiet, too quiet. I thought about what I'd done and what I hadn't. I hadn't cleared Rachel's name. I hadn't destroyed it either. I'd left her standing in a place where the system would watch her, not punish her, where any future step in the wrong direction would be noticed immediately. That was the line I'd drawn. Justice without spectacle. Containment without cruelty. I didn't know yet if it would be enough. But I knew something else, with absolute certainty. Nothing in my life would ever feel as simple as it had before. And I would never again assume that doing nothing was the same as doing no harm. People expect consequences to arrive loudly. Sirens, raised voices, doors slamming. They expect some moment where everything tips at once and the truth announces itself to the world. That isn't how it happened. What followed my decision was quieter than any argument we'd had. Quieter than the knock from the investigators. Quieter, even, than the click of the garage door in the middle of the night that had started all of this. The first sign was the silence. Rachel didn't call anymore. Not to explain, not to ask for help, not even to argue. Days went by without her name, lighting up my phone. The house stayed still. Ellie adjusted to the absence faster than I expected, finding new spots to sleep, new routines that didn't involve waiting by the front door. At work, things resumed in a way that almost felt insulting in its normalcy. My badge worked again. My login credentials were restored. The compliance portal greeted me with the same bland dashboard it always had. No announcement, no apology. Just a system that had decided I was safe again. During the first week back, no one asked questions. That was intentional. In environments like mine, people don't want stories. They want certainty. The absence of discussion was its own kind of verdict. I kept my head down, did my job, signed off on inspections, corrected minor errors, re-establish my place without drawing attention to it. The review left no mark on my official record. That alone told me I'd made the right move. Outside of work, though, the consequences spread in ways I hadn't anticipated. One afternoon, I checked my credit report out of habit more than fear. The inquiries had stopped. The alerts were gone. A few disputed items were still marked as under review, but nothing new had appeared. Desert Bloom Logistics no longer showed up anywhere. Its filings were still technically active, but every associated account was frozen. No movement, no activity. A company can exist on paper long after it has died in practice. I ran into Mark once. It was at a gas station near the freeway, a place I stopped at occasionally on my way home. I recognized his car before I recognized him. He was standing by the pump, head down, phone pressed to his ear. He looked up when I walked past. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Not hostile, not surprised. Like two people acknowledging the end of a transaction. He hung up and nodded once. I nodded back. Neither of us spoke. I realized then that he'd already moved on. People like him always do. He would find another opening, another system, another person with clean edges and quiet habits. What I'd done hadn't stopped him forever. It had just stopped him here. That was enough. Rachel didn't disappear entirely. I heard about her through indirect channels. A mutual cousin mentioned she'd moved again. A friend of a friend said she was figuring things out. No business names. No specifics. I didn't ask questions. The distance between us became something solid. A line neither of us tried to cross. At night, alone in the house, I sometimes replayed the final conversation we'd had. Not the words themselves, but the tone. The realization in her voice when she understood what I'd done not to her, but around her. I hadn't exposed her. I'd removed the ground beneath her feet. That distinction mattered. There were moments, quiet ones, usually late at night when doubt crept in, when I wondered if I'd been too careful, too restrained, if I'd traded clarity for comfort. Those moments didn't last, because every time they surfaced, I reminded myself of what hadn't happened. No charges, no subpoenas, no headlines, no calls from reporters asking how it felt to turn in my own sister. I hadn't become a symbol. I hadn't become a warning. I hadn't become anything except a man who had protected his life without burning down everything attached to it. That mattered more than I'd expected. The real cost came later. Months later, it came in small, unexpected ways. Like when a coworker asked if I wanted to co-sign on a project outside of work, and I felt my body tense before my mind could respond. Like when my bank offered me a refinancing option, and I read every line twice instead of once. Like when someone used the word trust casually in conversation, and it felt heavier than it should have. The collapse hadn't taken my job or my house. It had taken my assumptions. One evening, after a long day, I sat on the back patio watching the sun drop behind the low desert hills. The heat lingered in the concrete. Ellie lay beside me, her breathing slow and even. I thought about how easily this could have gone another way. If I'd acted too fast, I would have destroyed Rachel and myself, along with her. If I'd acted too slow, I would have become part of the problem I was trying to escape. The narrow path I'd taken didn't feel heroic. It felt lonely. There was no moment where everything felt resolved. No sense of triumph. Just the steady return of control, piece by piece. That's the part no one prepares you for. Justice, when it comes without spectacle, doesn't feel like victory. It feels like responsibility. As the weeks passed, the story faded for everyone but me. New problems replaced old ones. New audits. New deadlines. Life continued. But I didn't. Not entirely. I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Seen how easily systems could be bent by people who knew where to apply pressure. How quickly a name could shift from asset to liability without a single loud mistake. I knew now that stability wasn't something you achieved and kept. It was something you defended, quietly, constantly, and sometimes at a cost no one else could see. That was the true collapse. Not of Rachel, not of Mark, not even of Desert Bloom Logistics. It was the collapse of the version of myself that believed doing the right thing would always look right from the outside. That version was gone. What remained was something less comfortable, but far more durable. And as I sat there in the cooling air, watching the light disappear from the sky, I understood one final truth. The most lasting consequences aren't the ones that make noise. They're the ones you live with, long after everyone else has stopped paying attention. There is a version of this story that ends cleanly. It ends with a confession, a courtroom, a verdict. It ends with names read aloud and consequences assigned in neat, public ways. People like that ending. It gives them a place to stand. This isn't that version. The real ending arrived slowly, without ceremony. And it asked something of me that no investigator, no lawyer, no system ever did. It asked me to decide what silence was worth. Months passed. The heat softened into fall, then crept back again the way it does in Arizona, never fully leaving. Life settled into a new rhythm that looked, from the outside, almost identical to the old one. Same house, same job, same early mornings. But the man moving through those routines was not the same. I stopped checking my credit report daily, then weekly, then only when something prompted me. The alerts stayed quiet. The disputes closed one by one, all in my favor. My name, at least on paper, returned to its old shape. At work, my supervisor started trusting me with sensitive reviews again. Not explicitly, no one ever said, "We trust you," but the access came back. The responsibility followed. That was how trust worked in professional spaces. It wasn't declared. It was assumed, until it wasn't. Rachel never asked for forgiveness. That surprised me at first. I'd expected some attempt at apology, a justification, something that would force me to respond, but it never came. In time, I understood why. An apology would have required her to name what she'd done, and naming it would have made it real in a way she wasn't ready to face. I heard about her once more, months later, through a mutual acquaintance. She'd taken a job out of state, nothing glamorous, nothing tied to logistics or finance. A clean break, as clean as one could be under the circumstances. "She's doing okay," the acquaintance said, keeping her head down. "And her." I nodded and said nothing. That was the moment I realized the story was finished, whether I liked the ending or not. The temptation to speak, to clarify, to expose, to tell people what had really happened didn't disappear overnight. It lingered in small, sharp moments. When a coworker complained about people who game the system. When a news story about fraud scrolled past on the TV. When someone used the word family like it was a guarantee instead of a risk. Each time, I felt the weight of everything I could say, everything I didn't. There were days when I wondered if my restraint had been cowardice, if I'd taken the easy way out by choosing containment over confrontation, if silence had been a way to avoid the discomfort of watching someone I loved fall apart under scrutiny. Those thoughts came, and they went. What stayed was something steadier. I'd learned what full exposure would have cost not just Rachel, but me. My life would have survived, yes, but it would have been reshaped around a single defining act. I would have become the man who turned in his sister. Every explanation after that would have sounded like justification, no matter how factual it was. I hadn't been willing to pay that price. And more importantly, I hadn't been willing to pretend that destroying her would have repaired me. One evening, long after the last file was closed and the last alert silenced, I sat at the kitchen table with the red folder in front of me. I hadn't opened it in weeks, maybe months. Inside were the documents that could still change everything if I chose to release them. The forged guarantee, the access logs, the statements. They were still valid, still usable, still capable of causing damage. I ran my hand over the folder and thought about what it represented. Power. Not the loud kind, not the kind that demands attention, the quiet kind that waits patiently for permission. I stood up, walked to the shredder, and fed the papers through one by one. I didn't rush. I didn't hesitate either. When it was done, the folder was empty. That was the final choice. Not because the truth no longer mattered, but because it no longer belonged to anyone else. I didn't feel relief afterward. Not exactly. What I felt was acceptance. Acceptance that some forms of justice don't end in correction, but in containment. That some wrongs can't be undone without creating new ones. That sometimes the most ethical decision is not the most complete one. I had protected myself. I had stopped the damage. I had refused to become what the situation demanded of me at its worst. That had to be enough. Ellie padded into the kitchen and sat at my feet, looking up expectantly. I scratched behind her ears and smiled despite myself. Life, as it turns out, doesn't reward closure. It rewards continuity. I still wake up early, still wait for the garage door to open fully before backing out, still check my mirrors twice, still read contracts line by line. The habits stayed. The innocence didn't. If there's a lesson here, it isn't about fraud or family or systems. It's about the space between truth and action, the place where character lives. Anyone can expose wrongdoing. Not everyone can decide when not to. I chose silence, not because it was easier, but because it was heavier. Because it meant carrying the knowledge without the release of confession. Because it meant living with ambiguity instead of resolution. And I'll carry it for the rest of my life. Not as a burden, as a boundary. Because some truths don't need to be shouted to be real. And some endings don't look like justice from the outside, but they're the only ones that let you wake up the next morning and keep living without becoming someone you don't recognize. That's the price I paid, and that's the ending I chose.